They told me revenge is a dish best served cold. They were wrong. It's not a dish, it's a blueprint. For 6 years, I was a ghost in his house. He thought I was just the help. He was wrong about that, too. He called my father a liar. He stole his life and buried the truth. He thought no one was watching, but I was, and I learned everything. I learned how to build and how to break. He had a vault for his stolen treasures, a son to carry his name, an empire built on lies. And I had a single, patient plan, to take it all away, piece by carefully crafted piece. My name is Marilyn. For 6 years, I was a ghost. I walked through my own life like a phantom, feeling the chill of the living world but unable to warm myself by its fire. The world had color, sound, and smell, but for me, it was a muted gray painting, blurred at the edges. The anchor that held me to the earth, my father, was gone, and I was left drifting. My father, Frank, was the kindest man I knew. He had hands that could coax music from a block of pine and a laugh that could make a bad day seem silly. He believed in the honesty of a handshake, the sacred bond of a man's word. That faith was his masterpiece, and it was also what killed him. Silas Thorne was the artist of the destruction. A man whose smile was professionally whitened and worth millions, a man who built empires with other people's dreams and broke them with other people's backs. His handshake was a trap, a contractual snare disguised as goodwill. My father, in his simple trust, walked right into it. For 20 years, Dad did small jobs for the Thorne family. He repaired the gables on their sprawling lodge, built a library ladder that slid on silent brass rails, carved a mantelpiece for Silas's office that was a scene of forest creatures so lifelike you expected them to blink. He spoke of Silas with a kind of awe, seeing the wealth not as obscene, but as evidence of a superior mind, a greater capacity for hard work. "He's a builder, like me, Marilyn," Dad would say, wiping sawdust from his brow. "Just on a bigger scale." When Silas announced Thorne Haven, a luxury community of homes nestled in the hills, he offered my father the lead contractor position. It was the culmination of a lifetime of honest labor. Dad mortgaged our home, the one he'd built board by board, to buy the equipment and hire the initial crew. He poured his soul into those foundations. Then, the payments from Thorne's development company, Eminence Holdings, started coming late. "Cash flow, Marilyn," Dad would reassure me, his eyes tired but still bright with belief. "Big projects have big hiccups. Silas's word is his bond." The bond shattered on a Thursday that smelled of wet cement and impending rain. A primary support beam in Unit 7 gave way. The beam, the investigation would later fail to conclusively prove, was made of substandard, underspec steel. Silas had ordered a cheaper batch, forging the quality certifications. The beam snapped like a toothpick. 3 men fell. My father was one of them. He didn't die on impact. He lingered for 2 weeks in the ICU, a network of tubes and wires holding his broken body together while the medical bills, a cruel, numerical echo of his physical ruin, mounted on the kitchen table at home. Silas Thorne visited the hospital once. He didn't bring flowers. He brought a man in a suit carrying a slim leather briefcase. Silas stood at the foot of the bed, looking down at my father, who was swimming in a morphine haze, his legs suspended in a cage of metal. "Frank," Silas said, his voice not unkind, just terribly, terribly final. "There's been a terrible error. The materials logs show you authorized a deviation from the spec sheet. I've got the signed purchase order right here." He held up a piece of paper. My father's eyes, cloudy with pain and drugs, tried to focus. He made a wet, guttural sound of denial. I know, Silas said, as if soothing a child. "The pressure of the budget, the timeline, it makes good men cut corners. I'm disappointed, but I'm not heartless. We'll get this sorted, but the families of the other men, they'll need someone to be accountable." He placed a heavy hand on the bed rail. "I'll see you in court, Frank." The paperwork was a masterpiece of forgery. Backdated signatures, altered emails from my father's account that I knew he never sent. The might of Thorne's legal team descended. We were countersued by the other injured workers' families. The bank called in the mortgage. We were drowning in a sea of paper, all of it shouting one word: liar. The stress was a second, invisible collapse. The night before he was to give a deposition, my father's heart, that good and weary heart, simply stopped. The coroner called it cardiac arrest. I knew it was a broken will. The ghost was born that night. I sold the house, his tools, everything that smelled like sawdust and him. I moved into a studio apartment with a window that viewed a brick wall. I got a job inputting numbers into a computer, my fingers moving while my soul was frozen in that hospital room. Every time I saw Silas Thorne's face in the business section, receiving an award, cutting a ribbon, grinning beside the mayor, a cold, silent scream would build inside me until I thought my ribs would crack. For 2 years, I haunted my own life. I thought of simple violence, a bullet, a shoved in front of a train. But that would just be an epilogue to his story, a sad footnote. Crazed daughter of disgraced contractor commits murder-suicide. It would prove him right. We were small, messy people. He was the titan, untouchable. Then, in the public library, I saw him on a donated television. He was at a charity gala for a children's hospital. He was speaking into a cluster of microphones, his hair silver and perfect. "We all have a responsibility," he intoned, his eyes scanning the crowd without seeing a single person, "to lift each other up, to balance the scales when fortune tilts them unfairly." Balance the scales. The phrase landed in the silence of my being like a single drop of water in an empty cavern. It echoed. It grew. A glacial calm settled over me. The chaotic anger was still there, but now it had a direction. It had a target. I would not kill Silas Thorne. I would do something far worse. I would become him. I would use his own methods, planning, leverage, deception, patience, to dismantle him. I would take the thing he loved most. I would take his legacy, brick by brick, until the monument he built to himself was dust. But how does a ghost wage war on a king? You cease to be a ghost. You become someone else entirely. Becoming Clara Evans was the first and most intricate piece of carpentry I ever undertook. I was no longer building a bookshelf. I was building a person. I used the last of my savings to take night classes in basic accounting and business software. I didn't need to be an expert. I needed to be competent, reliable. I spent hours in the library, not just reading, but observing. I studied the society pages, learning the rhythm of the world Silas and his wife, Eleanor, inhabited. Charity galas, symphony openings, museum fundraisers. Eleanor Thorne was the key. She was a slim, elegant woman in her 50s, often pictured slightly behind Silas, her smile polite but never reaching her eyes. The captions called her a philanthropist and arts patron. Her pet project was the City Symphony Orchestra, which was perennially on the brink of financial collapse. I started there. Using the name Clara Evans, I volunteered for the Symphony Guild. I stuffed envelopes, organized name tags for galas, and learned their archaic donor database. I was quiet, efficient, and never complained about the tedious work. I made sure solutions to small problems seemed to emerge from me organically. When the software for their annual silent auction crashed a week before the event, I stayed all night and fixed it, cross-referencing donor bids from paper backups. I didn't make a show of it. I simply handed the completed, reconciled file to the flustered event coordinator the next morning. Eleanor Thorne heard about it. "You're the one who saved the auction?" she asked me at the post-gala cleanup, her voice cultured and soft. "I just sorted the data, Mrs. Thorne," I said, keeping my eyes modestly lowered. "It was a system glitch." She said. I saw it then in her gaze, a loneliness, an intelligence starved for real conversation amidst the hollow chatter of her world. "Well, thank you, Clara. It's refreshing to meet someone who simply gets things done." The bridge was built. A month later, her personal assistant left abruptly. Eleanor called me. "Clara, this is terribly short notice, but my assistant has moved to Portland. I'm swamped with the symphony's annual fundraiser. Would you consider a temporary position just to help me get through the season? The pay is modest, but the hours are flexible." It was the crack in the fortress wall. "I'd be honored, Mrs. Thorne," I said. My life became a performance. Clara Evans wore neutral-colored blouses and tailored trousers. She spoke in a calm, measured tone. She remembered everything: Eleanor's preference for tea at 3 p.m., her allergy to lilies, the birthdays of her distant nieces. I managed her calendar, her correspondence, the logistics of her charitable work. I was a ghost again, but now I was a useful one, a pleasant spirit in the opulent, cold spaces of the Thorne world. Silas barely acknowledged me for the first 6 months. I was furniture, but I listened. I learned the rhythms of the house. I learned that Silas had a temper he kept carefully contained in public, a cold fury that would manifest in a snapped pencil or a suddenly quiet, cutting remark to a staff member. I learned he had two great loves: his son, Julian, and his collection. Julian was a younger version of his father in looks only. He had the same sharp bone structure, the same gray eyes, but where Silas's were calculating, Julian's held a restless, curious light. He was fresh out of business school, being groomed for eminence holdings, but he chafed under his father's thumb. I'd overhear snippets of their arguments, usually about Julian's desire to launch a sustainable tech startup, something about modular, eco-friendly housing. "It's a boutique fantasy, Julian," Silas would say, his voice dripping with contempt. "We build empires, not treehouses." The collection was different. It was Silas's secret heart. He had a private, climate-controlled vault at his hunting lodge. Eleanor once mentioned it offhandedly, calling it Silas's buried treasure. Through careful, painstaking digital sleuthing, using access to household accounts and a keystroke logger I installed on the lodge's office computer during a Christmas party, I began to map its contents. Not just valuable art, but tainted art. Antiquities from conflict zones, paintings with gaps in their provenance large enough to drive a truck through, bought with funds shuffled through shell companies in Cyprus and the Cayman Islands. This collection was his proof of being a cultured conqueror, not a mere money grubber. My break came during a minor domestic crisis. Silas's corporate bookkeeper was disputing a series of expenses from the lodge: landscaping, security upgrades, wine purchases. It was a pittance to him, but the principle annoyed him. He was ranting at Eleanor over breakfast. "The man is incompetent, it's a simple ledger." "Perhaps you need a fresh set of eyes, dear," Eleanor said mildly, stirring her tea. "Clara is quite adept with numbers. She streamlined the entire symphony budget." Silas looked over at me, as if noticing me for the first time. "You, Clara, can you read a profit and loss statement?" "Yes, Mr. Thorne," I said, meeting his gaze just briefly before looking down. "HMPH. The lodge books are in the study. See if you can find where that idiot went wrong. Don't touch anything else." The ledger was a deliberate mess, a mixture of legitimate business expenses and Silas's lavish personal spending. It was a test. I worked through the night in my tiny apartment, not just finding the double-billed landscaping invoice, but creating a crystal-clear, color-coded spreadsheet that separated business, personal, and ambiguous expenses, with recommendations for streamlining. I printed it and placed it on his desk before he arrived for his morning coffee. He studied it for a full 5 minutes, silent. Then he looked up at me. "You did this?" "Yes, sir." "It's thorough." A faint, grudging respect colored his voice. "Eleanor was right, you're not just a social secretary." From then on, slowly, drip by drip, I was given more access. I began handling the accounts for his private hobbies: the lodge, the collection's insurance premiums, the donations to obscure political action committees. I was the model of discretion. I saw the mechanisms of his power: the gentle extortion disguised as investment, the friendly threats to zoning boards, the way he used lawsuits not to win, but to bankrupt opponents through legal fees. I copied everything: every spreadsheet, every email, every scan of a dubious certificate of authenticity. I stored them in multiple encrypted locations, my digital treasure hoard. The plan was forming, a 3-act play of destruction. Act 1, the broken sentinel. I would target his security, both physical and psychological. His head of security, a grimly loyal ex-military man named Royce, was the guardian of the vault and Silas's closest confidant in dirty deeds. He was also, I learned, bitterly resentful that his bonus had been cut after the Thornhaven incident, as the media called it. Silas saw it as a penalty for the bad press. Silas decided to loan a spectacular piece: a pre-Columbian funerary mask of solid gold, with a provenance full of holes, to the University Museum for an exhibit titled Lost Kingdoms. It was a vanity project, a chance to be hailed as a scholar patron. The security plan for transport was on Silas's home computer. I copied it. The hijacking was elegant. No violence. The armored car was stopped at a traffic light when its electronic systems, GPS, locks, comms, were remotely disabled by a sophisticated cyberattack I had arranged through a dark web contact paid with Bitcoin from an untraceable wallet. Two men in generic delivery uniforms transferred the crate into a white van. It vanished. Silas was incandescent with rage. He couldn't go to the police without exposing his illicit acquisition. He paced his study, suspecting everyone. "Mr. Thorne," I ventured quietly, holding a tablet. "I was reconciling last month's lodge accounts, and there's a transaction I can't categorize. A wire transfer from Eminence Holdings to an offshore entity called Aegis Holdings. It's for a large sum. The memo line just says asset management. It was authorized the week before the museum transport." I showed him the fake transfer I'd inserted into his financial records. Aegis Holdings was a shell company, but with a few hours of digging by a paranoid man, it could be loosely linked to Royce's brother-in-law. The seed of betrayal was planted in fertile soil. Silas confronted Royce. The man's bewildered denial only confirmed Silas's suspicions in his own mind. He fired Royce on the spot, accusing him of orchestrating the heist. Royce, humiliated and furious, walked away with a wealth of insider knowledge. Within weeks, anonymous, detailed tips about Silas's tax irregularities began arriving at the IRS. The first external pressure was applied. The mighty wall had its first hairline crack. Act 2, the sundered legacy. With Silas distracted by the IRS audit and fuming over the loss of his mask, I turned to Julian. I found him one evening in the garden, staring into the fountain, a picture of dejection. "Rough day, Julian?" I asked, carrying a tray of empty glasses back from one of Aliner's meetings. He sighed. "My father thinks my startup plans are a children's drawing. He wants me to fire half the staff at the downtown office to improve efficiency. They're people, not numbers." "Your modular housing idea," I said. "The one with the integrated solar and water reclamation. Have you done a full scalability model, market penetration analysis?" He looked at me, surprised. "You know about that?" "Your mother mentioned it. I think it's fascinating. I'm good with spreadsheets if you ever want a second pair of eyes on the financials." He was lonely for an ally. He sent me his plans. They were, in truth, brilliant, ethical, innovative, and viable. I didn't just review them. I spent weeks perfecting them in secret, creating a business plan so airtight it could survive a hurricane. I found potential investors, ethical venture capital firms that Silas would despise. I drafted a pitch deck. Then, I performed the surgery. I created a second set of documents. These showed funds being siphoned from Eminence Holdings' operating budget into an account linked to Julian's startup. I forged Julian's signature on transfer orders. The evidence was subtle, damning, and perfectly aligned with Silas's perception of his son as a rebellious, entitled dreamer. I brought the forged documents to Silas during a moment of high stress about the IRS inquiry. "Mr. Thorne, I found these on the shared server drive," I said, my voice trembling with fabricated anxiety. I think Julian is trying to protect his project, but the way he's doing it, it looks like he's diverting company capital." The reaction was volcanic. Silas confronted Julian that night. I listened from the hallway, my heart a cold, still stone in my chest. "You're stealing from me, from the company that bears our name?" Silas's voice was a low, dangerous whipcrack. "What are you talking about?" "I would never." Julian's confusion was real. "I have the transfers, your signature. You're not a visionary, Julian, you're a thief. A common thief building a castle with stolen bricks." The fight escalated, years of paternal pressure and filial resentment exploding. Julian's confusion turned to rage at the false accusation. "You see betrayal everywhere because you're made of it," Julian shouted. "This company, this legacy, is a prison built on lies. I want no part of it." "Then get out," Silas roared. "And don't think you'll get a cent from me to fund your fantasy. I don't want your money, I don't want anything from you." The door slammed. Julian left that night. The next day, using the real business plan and a small trust fund from his maternal grandfather that Silas couldn't touch, he secured his first round of legitimate funding. The rupture was in the society columns. Heir to Thorne Empire strikes out on his own. Silas's legacy, his biological and professional successor, was gone. The second major crack split the wall down the middle. Act 3, the flood. Now Silas was wounded, isolated. The IRS was a persistent gnat. Royce was a potential witness. Julian was gone, a public relations wound. Aliner retreated further into her music, a silent statue of disappointment. Silas grew more reliant on me, Clara, the only one who seemed calm, capable, and loyal amidst the chaos. It was time to break the dam. I compiled my digital treasure trove into a narrative. I created a master document, a plain English guide to the crimes of Silas Thorne. Chapter 1, Tax Evasion and Wire Fraud with Spreadsheets. Chapter 2, Smuggling of Cultural Artifacts with Provenance Files and Insurance Records. Chapter 3, Corporate Negligence and Falsified Safety Reports. The Truth of Thorne Haven, with the original, unforged material orders and the emails from Silas demanding cost cuts by any means necessary. I linked it all, a prosecutor's dream. On a Tuesday morning, I sent it. The FBI's white-collar crime unit, the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, the State Attorney General, the editors of the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the local Metro paper. The package was untraceable, sent from a hacked server in an internet cafe across town. Then, I triggered the final, symbolic blow. At exactly 9 a.m., when Silas would be at his desk and his staff at their terminals, a script I'd buried deep in his network executed. Every screen, computer, tablet, smartphone on the company plan flickered. Then, an image filled them. A scanned, faded photograph of my father, Frank, in his workshop, covered in sawdust, smiling broadly as he held up a beautifully carved wooden songbird. Beneath it, in a simple font, were the two words that had fueled my 6-year journey, "For Frank." For 10 seconds, there was silence in his empire. Then, the screaming started. Phones began ringing. The first news alert buzzed on a dozen devices simultaneously. Breaking, federal warrants served at Eminence Holdings. The collapse was swift and spectacular. Federal agents in windbreakers swarmed the offices, carrying out boxes of files. The news vans surrounded his gated home. The headlines were merciless. Beneath the philanthropist, a web of fraud. Thorne Haven tragedy, new evidence points to criminal negligence. A collection built on theft. His assets were frozen. His board of directors voted him out. His lawyers, sensing a sinking ship, began negotiating their own exits. Eleanor, finally presented with irrefutable proof of the monster she'd lived with, filed for divorce. The world he built, the story he crafted of the self-made titan, was rewritten in a day. The new story was of a cheat, a thief, and a killer. I quit the next day. I sent a brief, polite email to Eleanor, thanking her for the opportunity and wishing her well. I deleted every trace of Clara Evans. The blouses were donated. The tablet was wiped and sold. The ghost of Clara dissolved into the air. A month later, the preliminary hearings began. Silas Thorne was out on a record-high bail, a shell of his former self. The expensive suits now looked borrowed, his posture defeated. The press followed him like scavengers. I put on a simple black dress, the only nice thing I owned from my life before. I went to the courthouse. I stood at the back of the scrum of reporters as he emerged, his lawyer speaking in low, urgent tones beside him. He was shuffling towards a waiting sedan, his eyes on the ground, trying to block out the shouted questions. Then he looked up. His gaze swept over the crowd and snagged on me. There was a blankness at first, just a woman in black. Then a flicker, a slow, dawning horror. The efficient assistant, the trusted Clara. The financial leaks, the ruined security chief, the estranged son, the catastrophic data breach, it all spiraled back to a single point. The daughter of the carpenter he'd destroyed. The crowd seemed to fade as he stared. I walked forward, calm, clear. The reporters, sensing a moment, went quiet, cameras focusing. "Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice steady and clear in the hushed space. He stopped. His face was ashen. "Do I know you?" he asked, the question a desperate plea for the nightmare to be untrue. "You knew my father," I said. "Frank." "The carpenter?" Recognition, total and devastating, flooded his features. It wasn't just putting a name to a face. It was the understanding of the scale, the depth, the patience of the vengeance. This wasn't bad luck or a rival's attack. This was a geological force, shifting slowly over years to bury him. This was a daughter's love, turned into a weapon of exquisite, meticulous ruin. "You," he breathed, the word carrying the weight of his collapsed world. I took one step closer, my voice dropping to a whisper only he and the closest microphones could catch. "It was never about the money, Silas. You took a good man's life, his name, his dignity. You thought you could bury him and no one would care. You were wrong." I held his shattered gaze, letting him see the unwavering truth in mine. He had me. The horror in his eyes was complete. It was the final balance. I had not just taken his wealth or his freedom. I had taken his power, his family, his story. I had proven that his bond was worthless, and my father's, the bond of love and memory, was unbreakable. I had rewritten his ending from the inside. I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I walked down the courthouse steps, through the crowd, and into the flow of ordinary people on the sidewalk. The spring sun was warm on my skin. For the first time in 6 years, I felt its warmth. I felt the air in my lungs. I was no longer a ghost. I was Marilyn. I drove out of the city to the small, well-kept cemetery on a hill. I knelt before the simple granite stone. Frank Miller, beloved father, honest man. I placed the small wooden songbird on the grass before it, the one he'd carved for me when I was 10 that I'd kept hidden all these years. "It's done, Dad," I whispered, my voice finally breaking, tears streaming down my face not from grief, but from a profound, weary release. "The scales are balanced. You can rest now." The revenge didn't bring him back. The hole his absence left in the world remained, a shape only he could fill. But the silence around that hole was no longer filled with the echoing lies of Sela's thorn. It was filled with the truth. It was filled with the memory of his laugh, the smell of sawdust, the strength of his hands. I stood up, wiping my tears. I looked out over the green hills, feeling a future open up before me, blank and full of possibility. The work of the ghost was over. The long winter of waiting had ended. From the deepest wrong, a fierce and final justice had grown. And from the ashes of that justice, I could finally begin to live again.